I never thought I would become an entrepreneur. In fact, growing up, I had zero aspirations to run a business. I was the kid who dreamt of being a writer, an artist, someone who created things in a quiet, solitary space. I had no interest in sales, marketing, or anything that seemed remotely corporate. But life, as it often does, threw me a curveball, and it changed everything. It all started when I was 25. At that point, I had just moved to a new city, freshly graduated from college, and was scrambling to pay rent while working two part-time jobs. One was at a coffee shop, the other at a local bookstore. I loved the bookstore because it allowed me to be surrounded by books, but the coffee shop, not so much. Every day I got yelled at by customers, spilled coffee on my clothes, and got frustrated by the demands of the job. It wasn't my dream job by any means, but it paid the bills. One day, I was standing behind the counter of the coffee shop, serving yet another unhappy customer when I noticed something unusual. A regular customer, a woman in her late 40s, came in with a smile on her face. She was a freelance graphic designer, always upbeat, and often shared stories about her work. That day, she seemed especially excited. "Hey, how's it going?" I asked, handing her a latte. "Great," she replied, grinning. "I just signed a huge contract with a client, and I'm expanding my business." I nodded, making small talk. But then something she said stuck with me. "I'm trying to grow my business, but I need help with organizing my client files and invoices. I'm so overwhelmed by the admin stuff." I'd always been somewhat of an organizer. I loved using tools like spreadsheets and project management apps to make things run smoothly. In fact, I had even created a little spreadsheet for my own personal finances, and I enjoyed keeping track of everything. I had no formal training in business or design, but I knew how to stay organized. Without thinking too much about it, I said, I could help you with that. I love organizing stuff like that, and I bet I could create a system for you to make your life easier." She seemed intrigued. "Really? That would be amazing. Let's chat more about it later." That simple conversation changed my life. I didn't think much of it at the time, but a week later, she called me. "So, about that organization thing you mentioned," she said. "Would you be interested in helping me set up a full system for my business? I could pay you for it." At that moment, I realized I had just been given an opportunity. I didn't have a business background, and I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew that this could be the chance I needed to break out of the grind of coffee shop life. I agreed, and we set up a meeting to discuss her needs. Over the next few weeks, I worked closely with her. I learned how to set up systems for client management, invoicing, and project tracking. I used free tools like Google Sheets, Trello, and Canva to create an organized workflow that helped her get things done more efficiently. It wasn't revolutionary, but it worked, and she was thrilled with the results. Not only did I help her save time, but I also helped her present a more professional image to her clients. She was so impressed with the work I'd done that she recommended me to several other freelancers in her network. Word spread quickly, and within a couple of months, I had more clients than I could handle. I started charging for my services and even set up a simple website to showcase what I was offering. At the time, I still didn't think of myself as an entrepreneur. I was just a person helping other people, but soon enough, I realized that I was running a business. My services had expanded beyond simple organization. I was helping people with everything from email management to social media scheduling and bookkeeping. People were paying me for something I had never really considered a skill, and I was making more money than I ever had in my part-time jobs. But it wasn't without challenges. I remember one month where I had taken on too much work and was juggling multiple projects. I was working 60-hour weeks and barely had time to sleep. I was exhausted, and I started to doubt myself. I thought maybe I was in over my head, that I wasn't cut out for this entrepreneurial life. But one of my clients, a small business owner who had been with me from the beginning, gave me a piece of advice that I'll never forget. If you're not failing sometimes, you're not growing. Embrace it. That piece of advice changed my mindset. Instead of fearing failure, I began to see it as a necessary part of the process. I learned from my mistakes, honed my skills, and began to focus on streamlining my business processes. I hired a few freelancers to help with the workload and started outsourcing tasks like social media marketing and bookkeeping. I invested in better tools and spent time learning about business growth and scaling. Slowly, my client base grew and my income increased. But there was always something missing. I had built a successful business, but I didn't feel fulfilled. The work was enjoyable, but I didn't feel like I was truly making a difference. Then, one day, I met a client who completely changed my perspective. She was a nonprofit organization that helped provide clean water to communities in developing countries. She had a shoestring budget but needed help managing donor communications and fundraising efforts. I agreed to work with her, not for the money, but because I believed in the mission. I spent hours creating systems to track donations, send out thank you emails, and plan fundraising events. It wasn't just a job, it felt meaningful. That experience made me realize that I wanted my business to be about more than just helping individuals organize their work. I wanted to use my skills to help businesses and nonprofits make a positive impact. I decided to pivot my business and focus on helping mission-driven organizations streamline their operations. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. Today, my business is thriving. I have a small team of people who share my passion for helping others, and we work with clients all over the world. I still use the same tools I started with, Google Sheets, Trello, and Canva, but I've learned how to use them in more strategic ways. I've created systems for clients in education, healthcare, and the arts, and every time we help a client achieve their goals, it reminds me why I started this journey. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. I never set out to be an entrepreneur, but now I can't imagine doing anything else. It's been a roller coaster ride full of ups and downs, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. I've learned so much about myself, about business, and about the power of helping others. And now, when I look at the young kid working behind the counter at a coffee shop, I know that anything is possible, even if you start from the bottom with no idea where you're going. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. I never expected that the most significant turning point in my life would come from a simple conversation at a coffee shop. I had been grinding for years, working a corporate job that I hated, living paycheck to paycheck, and barely making time for anything other than work. But that conversation, that one unexpected interaction, opened my eyes to a whole new world, one where I could take control, build something from scratch, and live a life I actually wanted. Here's how it all started. I was working as a marketing associate for a mid-sized tech company at the time. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. I was in my late 20s, unmarried, no kids, and living alone in a modest apartment. My friends were all doing the same thing, working regular 9-to-5 jobs, figuring out how to make ends meet, and spending weekends recovering from the grind. It wasn't a bad life, but I always felt something was missing. I wanted more than just surviving. One afternoon, after an especially exhausting week, I decided to skip my usual commute home and stop at a local coffee shop instead. I wasn't in the mood to make dinner, and I wanted to sit somewhere quiet, away from the noise of the office, and just think. As I walked in, I noticed a man sitting at a table by the window. He was dressed in a smart casual manner, had a relaxed but confident demeanor, and seemed absorbed in some sort of business meeting, though no one else was at his table. I grabbed my coffee, sat down at a table near the window, and tried to mind my own business. But something about him intrigued me. I couldn't help but overhear his conversation. He was discussing a new venture he was launching, a digital marketing agency, but he wasn't talking like someone who was just starting out. He spoke with authority, like he'd been in the game for years, even though his words didn't match his age. I was dying to know more, but I didn't want to eavesdrop. Eventually, the conversation ended, and he stood up to leave. On a whim, I decided to walk up to him. He smiled when I approached, and I felt oddly at ease. "Hey," I couldn't help but overhear. "You mentioned a digital marketing agency? That sounds interesting," I said, hoping I didn't sound like a complete creep. To my surprise, he was friendly. "Yeah, it's something I've been working on for a while. Just launched it this year. I'm always happy to talk about it. What about you?" "I'm a marketing associate. I've been doing it for a few years, but honestly, I feel like I'm stuck in a rut. I can't see myself doing this forever, you know?" He nodded thoughtfully. "I get it. It's easy to feel like that in a corporate environment. But there's a whole world out there beyond the 9-to-5. Have you ever thought about starting your own thing?" I laughed, a little nervously. I don't have the guts to go out on my own. Besides, I don't have any big ideas. His expression turned serious. That's exactly how I felt when I first started. I didn't have any groundbreaking idea either. But I knew that if I wanted to change my life, I needed to make a move. And that move didn't have to be anything earth-shattering. It just had to be mine. Sometimes, it's about getting out of your comfort zone and learning as you go. I was floored. This guy wasn't offering me a magic pill or some get-rich-quick scheme. He was just giving me a perspective shift, one that hit me hard. We talked for a little longer before he excused himself, but before he left, he handed me his business card and told me, "If you ever want to chat more about it, or just need some advice, feel free to reach out." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. I had always been afraid of failure. The fear of leaving the safety of a steady paycheck had kept me locked in a job I hated for years. But this stranger had planted a seed in my mind. Maybe I didn't need a huge, world-changing idea. Maybe I just needed to take a chance. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to do something different. I reached out to him, and we had a couple more casual meetings. He shared his experience of starting a business, his mistakes, and his small victories. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy, but he had found something that worked for him. He wasn't an overnight success, but his business was growing, and he seemed genuinely fulfilled. It wasn't long before I took the plunge. I decided to start my own freelance marketing business. I'd been in the industry long enough to know how to help small companies build their online presence, improve their branding, and reach more customers. So, I started small. I took on 1 or 2 clients on the side while still working my 9 to 5. I wasn't ready to quit my job yet, but I wanted to test the waters. The first few months were rough. I was juggling my day job, late nights working on client projects, and trying to figure out the business side of things. But every time I got a new client, every time I saw one of my campaigns succeed, I felt a spark of excitement that I hadn't felt in years. Then, one day, about 6 months into this hustle, I received an email that changed everything. One of my clients, a small e-commerce store, had seen a 300% increase in sales after implementing the marketing strategies I'd suggested. They were thrilled with the results and wanted to discuss a long-term partnership. That was my moment. I realized that I could actually do this full-time. So, I made the leap. I quit my job and dove headfirst into entrepreneurship. It was terrifying, but the freedom and sense of purpose I gained from being my own boss were worth every sleepless night. The first year was a grind. I had to learn everything: how to manage finances, how to scale, how to market my own business, but slowly, things started to fall into place. I expanded my services, hired a small team, and built systems to handle the increasing workload. The money wasn't rolling in at first, but I was making enough to support myself, and more importantly, I was happy. It's been almost 5 years since I took that leap. My business has grown beyond what I ever imagined, and I've learned more than I could have ever expected. I'm still not where I want to be, but I'm on the right path. I'm living life on my terms, and I no longer feel stuck. That random conversation in a coffee shop was the catalyst for everything. It was a reminder that sometimes, all it takes is a different perspective to realize that you don't have to settle for a life that doesn't excite you. You just have to take a chance and trust yourself. It's not easy, and there will always be setbacks, but the reward is worth it. And the best part? Now, I get to help other people take that same leap. My business has evolved into not just a marketing agency, but a resource for entrepreneurs looking to start their own ventures. I've had the privilege of working with so many incredible people, and I truly believe that anyone, with the right mindset and a little courage, can make a change. It wasn't an easy journey, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. If you're reading this and you're stuck in a rut, know that change is possible. You just have to take that first step. I've been in business for over a decade now, but looking back, it still feels like yesterday when I took that first leap. I wasn't born into a wealthy family, nor did I have the privilege of knowing a lot of influential people. It was just me, an idea, and the willingness to hustle. I had always been one of those kids who dreamed big, but not in the conventional sense. While my friends were aiming for careers in law, medicine, or engineering, I was glued to my computer screen, studying the ins and outs of e-commerce, digital marketing, and entrepreneurship. I was fascinated by the potential the internet had to offer. The idea of creating something from scratch, building it from the ground up, and reaching customers across the globe was thrilling. At the time, I was working a 9 to 5 in a boring office job. It wasn't that I didn't enjoy the work. Well, that's a lie. I hated it, but I loved the stability it provided. There was just one problem. My dream was elsewhere. I would spend my lunch breaks reading books, watching YouTube videos, and even attending online webinars on entrepreneurship. But the more I learned, the more frustrated I became. The knowledge was there, but I couldn't get over the fear of taking the plunge. One day, while scrolling through a random subreddit, yep, the very one you're reading right now, I stumbled upon a post about how a person had turned a small online store into a six-figure business. That was the spark I needed. If they could do it, so could I. The decision wasn't easy, and trust me, it wasn't immediate either. I spent the next couple of months gathering as much information as possible. I researched business models, studied competitors, learned about dropshipping, sourcing products, and even dipped my toes into building a website. But the one thing I was terrified of was leaving my job. I wasn't sure if I could make enough money to support myself. And, I'll be honest, I didn't want to fail. The thought of failure terrified me to my core. But I realized that the real failure was never trying at all. So, I saved up as much as I could from my day job, and after months of planning, I finally pulled the trigger. I quit my job, much to the confusion of my friends and family, and launched my first online store. My goal was simple: sell products that people actually wanted and do it better than everyone else. I didn't have much capital, so I started small. I sourced products directly from suppliers, focusing on quality, customer service, and fast delivery. For the first few months, it was a grind. Sales trickled in slowly, and I was constantly tweaking the website, testing different products, and experimenting with different marketing strategies. I learned everything the hard way: how to run Facebook ads, how to set up email campaigns, how to handle customer complaints. There were days when I wondered if I had made a huge mistake. I was working 16-hour days, barely making ends meet, and feeling the weight of my decision. But I kept pushing forward. I believed in my idea, even when no one else did. Slowly, things started to click. One of the products I was selling, a niche item that I had found through extensive research, started gaining traction. I began running Facebook ads targeting specific demographics, and to my surprise, people were actually buying. Word of mouth spread, and the orders started coming in. I reinvested every penny I made into growing the business. I hired my first employee, a virtual assistant who helped me manage customer service and order fulfillment. But just as things were looking up, I hit a massive roadblock. One of my suppliers couldn't keep up with demand and started delivering late. Customers started complaining, and the negative reviews began to pile up. It felt like my entire business was falling apart. I remember sitting at my desk one night, staring at the screen in disbelief, wondering if I had just gotten lucky up until that point. Was I really cut out for this? That was when I realized I couldn't afford to be complacent. I needed to find new suppliers, streamline my processes, and build stronger relationships with my customers. I reached out to other suppliers, found a better solution, and improved my logistics. I made sure to communicate openly with my customers about any delays, and I offered them incentives for their patience. It wasn't easy, but I turned the situation around. My reputation with customers improved, and I was able to grow my business even more. Over the next few years, I scaled the business, expanding my product line, hiring a full-time team, and learning how to automate parts of the operation. I learned a ton about leadership, marketing, customer loyalty, and even finance. Looking back, I can honestly say that the challenges I faced shaped me into the entrepreneur I am today. If everything had been smooth sailing, I don't think I would have learned nearly as much as I did. In the end, my online store became a six-figure business. Not overnight, but after years of trial, error, and persistence. I still remember the first day I made a sale that was bigger than my monthly salary at my old job. It was a defining moment, one that confirmed everything I had worked for was worth it. I won't say it was all rainbows and butterflies. There were times when I questioned my decision, times when I was burned out, times when I wanted to throw in the towel. But now, having built a successful business, I can honestly say that it was the best decision I've ever made. Not just for the money, but for the freedom and satisfaction that comes with running your own business. To anyone reading this and thinking about starting their own business, let me tell you this: it won't be easy. There will be moments of doubt, moments when it feels like you're sinking. But if you keep pushing, keep learning, and keep grinding, it will eventually pay off. The key is to start, even when it feels like everything is stacked against you. The hardest part is taking that first step, but once you do, you'll find that the journey is worth every ounce of effort. I'm proud of what I've accomplished, but I also know that there's always room for growth. I continue to learn, adapt, and push myself further. So, if you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, go for it. Just remember, the road will be tough, but the destination is worth it. I never thought I'd be where I am today. Looking back, it feels like my whole life has been one unexpected twist after another, from losing everything to building something meaningful. It's been a roller coaster, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't have my fair share of moments where I thought about quitting. But here I am, running a successful business with employees who trust me, a brand that's slowly growing, and a sense of purpose I never thought possible. Let me start from the beginning. I grew up in a small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone's business. My parents were hardworking, middle-class folks who did their best to provide for me and my younger sister. I wasn't exactly a troublemaker, but I didn't excel in school either. I wasn't dumb, just more interested in doing things my own way. At 18, after I graduated high school, I didn't want to follow the traditional path of college and a 9-to-5 job. I had big ideas, though I didn't know exactly what they were yet. I was obsessed with the idea of making money, more specifically, finding a way to make money that wasn't tied to anyone else's rules. So, I started a few small side hustles. My first attempt was flipping products on eBay. I'd buy cheap electronics, clean them up, and resell them. It was slow at first. I remember my first sale. It was an old phone I'd bought $4.30, and I sold it $4.50. I was ecstatic, like I'd discovered the secret to life. But as I kept doing it, I realized I was just scraping by, not really building anything. I was working harder for less, and I started to get frustrated. Then, one day, everything changed. I was at a local flea market, just browsing, when I saw a vendor selling high-end watches at a ridiculously low price. Something didn't feel right about it, but my curiosity got the better of me. I asked the vendor where they got them from, and they mentioned they sourced them from a wholesaler in another state. My immediate thought was, if they can get them that cheap, maybe I can too. I spent the next couple of weeks doing deep research on how to source wholesale watches. I figured out the process, placed a small order, and waited for the shipment. The watches arrived, and I put them up for sale online. I used social media, especially Instagram, to market them, and to my surprise, they started selling like crazy. I remember the first time I made a sale for over $500. It was like a light bulb went off. I realized that the key wasn't just buying cheap and flipping. It was about finding a niche market, creating demand, and offering value in a way that appealed to people who were willing to pay for it. I dove headfirst into this new venture, even though I still had a full-time job at a tech company. I worked long hours, often staying up past midnight, fulfilling orders, and reaching out to new suppliers. Fast forward 6 months, and I'd saved up enough money to quit my day job and go full-time into the watch business. But just when I thought I had it all figured out, disaster struck. The wholesaler I was working with suddenly went out of business, and my main source of inventory dried up overnight. I was devastated. I had orders backed up, customers expecting deliveries, and no idea where I was going to get the product to fulfill them. I spent weeks scrambling to find new suppliers. I reached out to manufacturers, attended trade shows, and even traveled abroad in search of alternatives. But nothing seemed to click. During this time, my anxiety grew. I was living paycheck to paycheck, and my savings were running out. I thought about going back to my old job, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The idea of going back to a life of working for someone else felt like I'd failed. Then, a breakthrough came in the most unexpected way. One day, I got a call from a supplier I had been in contact with months earlier. They had a batch of high-quality watches that they could sell to me at a reasonable price. They were a smaller manufacturer, but their products were top-notch. I took the risk and placed a large order. When the shipment arrived, I was both nervous and excited. I created a new marketing campaign around these watches, and to my relief, they sold out in just a few days. It was a huge win, and it gave me the confidence I needed to push forward. But as my business grew, I started realizing that my success was limited by the model I had set up. The watch market was saturated, and I knew I had to diversify. I began looking at other products I could sell and stumbled upon the idea of custom leather goods. It seemed like a natural extension of my brand, and I was able to source materials and find skilled artisans who could create high-quality products. I started with wallets and belts, and they sold almost as quickly as the watches. By this point, I had hired a small team, just a few employees who helped with the day-to-day operations. I focused on building the brand, creating content, and fostering relationships with influencers who could promote our products. It wasn't easy, but we were slowly but surely building a reputation for quality and authenticity. The real turning point came when I made my first major investment in marketing. Up until then, I had done everything organically, but I knew it was time to scale. I hired a marketing agency to help me create targeted ad campaigns on Facebook and Instagram. It was a gamble, but it paid off in ways I never imagined. Sales skyrocketed, and the brand began to gain recognition in the market. As the business expanded, I started facing new challenges. Managing a growing team, dealing with customer service issues, and keeping up with inventory were just a few of the hurdles. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed, but I reminded myself that this was the price of success. I started to delegate more and trust my team. It wasn't easy. Letting go of control was a huge mental hurdle for me, but it was necessary. Now, years later, we're a thriving business. We've expanded our product line, built a loyal customer base, and even started offering services like custom engraving for our products. I look back at where I started, and I can hardly believe how far I've come. It hasn't been easy, and it certainly hasn't been a straight path, but it's been worth every ounce of struggle. I've learned so much through this journey, but the most important lesson I've learned is that perseverance is key. When everything feels like it's falling apart, that's often when you're closest to your breakthrough. The hardest days are the ones that test you the most, and the ones that ultimately make you stronger. If I could give one piece of advice to someone just starting out, it would be this: don't be afraid to fail. Every failure is an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to improve. Success is never a straight line. It's messy, unpredictable, and challenging. But if you keep pushing forward, you'll get there. And when you do, it'll be worth it. I started my first business when I was 22, and, like most new entrepreneurs, I had absolutely no clue what I was doing. I'd grown up with a solid middle-class background, nothing extravagant, but comfortable. My parents were hard-working folks, always pushing me to get good grades and go to college, which I did. I went through university, earned a degree in business, but something inside me always resisted the idea of working for someone else. I didn't want to follow the usual trajectory of corporate life. After I graduated, I took a job in sales because, honestly, it was the only thing I could get. I needed a paycheck, and I wasn't sure what else to do. I remember walking into the office every morning, sitting at my desk, staring at the clock and thinking, is this it? I realized that I was playing someone else's game and wasn't even sure if it was one I wanted to play. But I stuck it out for a while because, well, everyone tells you it's what you have to do, right? But then, one day, I had this crazy thought. What if I could do something myself? What if I could be my own boss? And that was the seed that started my entrepreneurial journey. The first idea I had was pretty simple. I loved fitness and had always been a bit of a gym rat. So I thought, why not open a fitness store? I could sell supplements, gear, maybe even offer some personal training sessions. It seemed like a great idea at the time. I spent countless hours researching products, suppliers, and even trying to find a location. I borrowed money from family and took out a loan, eager to get things started. I found a small, rundown retail space in a strip mall and spent weeks painting the walls, fixing up the floors, and making it look presentable. I even built a small website, although it looked terrible. But I didn't care. I was convinced that the business would take off once people saw how much passion I had for fitness. I was naive, and I didn't know it yet. Opening day came, and I was buzzing with excitement. I even made flyers and handed them out at the local gyms. But reality hit hard. Despite all my enthusiasm, the customers didn't come. I had barely enough foot traffic to pay the rent, let alone make a profit. After a few months of scrambling, I had to close the shop. It felt like a huge failure, but I didn't let it completely crush me. I still had that spark, that hunger to try again, and this time, I was going to be smarter. I had learned a lot from the fitness store, but I was ready for something new. That's when I pivoted to e-commerce. I'd always had an interest in tech, and I started researching dropshipping. The idea of running an online store without holding inventory seemed like a game changer to me. I didn't need much upfront investment, and I could do it all from home. This time, I took a different approach. I read everything I could find about e-commerce, dropshipping, online marketing, and SEO. I joined Facebook groups and forums, learned from people who had already made mistakes, and applied those lessons to my new venture. I realized that it wasn't just about selling products, it was about creating a brand and building trust with your customers. So I set up an online store selling tech gadgets. It was an obvious niche, but I figured there were enough people out there who would love the products I was selling. I remember spending days just perfecting my website and making sure everything looked sleek and professional. Then came the advertising. I had no experience with Facebook ads, so I started with a small budget and tested different ads. At first, nothing worked. My clicks were high, but no one was converting. So, I tweaked my ads, changed my targeting, and tried again. After months of small adjustments, the breakthrough came. Sales started coming in, and while they weren't huge at first, they were enough to get me excited. By year 2, my online store was making a steady profit. I was finally able to quit my day job, but I still had a long way to go. It wasn't easy. I worked 16-hour days, handling customer service, fulfillment, marketing, everything. But with each milestone, I felt more confident in my ability to build something sustainable. I also realized the power of customer feedback. So much of my growth came from listening to what my customers wanted and constantly improving my offerings. After 3 years of grinding, my e-commerce store was generating 6 figures annually, but it wasn't enough. I had bigger dreams. So, I reinvested my profits into new ventures. I began building a portfolio of online businesses, diversifying into different niches like home goods and fitness equipment. Each time, I used the lessons I learned from my first business and applied them to the next. That's when things really started to take off. In year 5, I launched a subscription-based model for one of my stores, which brought in recurring revenue. I focused on building a loyal customer base, offering exclusive discounts and special deals to subscribers. This took my business from just making money to actually building a brand that people loved and trusted. It's been almost 10 years now since I first got the idea to start my own business. Today, I run multiple e-commerce brands, and I've expanded into consulting for other entrepreneurs. I've traveled the world, and I've learned that success isn't linear. It's full of failures, pivoting, long nights, and countless lessons. But it's also incredibly rewarding. The feeling of being able to create something from nothing, to build something that people appreciate and rely on, is indescribable. The biggest lesson I've learned along the way is that success doesn't happen overnight. There's no magic formula, no secret hack. It's all about perseverance, learning from your mistakes, and constantly adapting. I'm still learning every day, but I wouldn't trade my journey for anything. So, to anyone reading this who's thinking about starting their own business, don't be afraid to fail. Fail fast, fail cheap, but keep going. It's not the failures that define you, it's how you bounce back from them that will determine your success. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. But I know that this is just the beginning. I've got bigger plans, and I'm not stopping anytime soon. I always knew I was different. As a kid, I would sit in the back of the classroom, lost in thought, dreaming about businesses, solving problems, and making money. I wasn't the most academically gifted, nor was I the most athletic, but there was something about the idea of creating something from nothing that always excited me. While other kids dreamed of becoming astronauts or doctors, I imagined myself running a company, making decisions that could change the world. Growing up in a small town, I didn't have many opportunities. My family wasn't wealthy, and we didn't know many people who were in business. My dad worked in a factory, and my mom was a nurse. They both worked hard to provide for me and my younger sister, but the thought of entrepreneurship was something completely foreign to them. Still, I was determined. By the time I graduated high school, I knew I wanted to go to college and learn everything I could about business. But I had no idea how I would pay for it. My parents had no savings to send me to school, and there was no way I could afford tuition on my own. It was a frustrating situation, but I wasn't about to give up. I started looking for ways to make money. I spent my summer days mowing lawns, doing odd jobs, and flipping anything I could find for a profit. I even tried to get a few friends together to start a small lawn care business. It didn't work out because none of us were particularly great at managing the business side of things. But what I learned from that experience was invaluable. I learned about customer service, budgeting, and how to work with others. Even though the business didn't succeed, the lessons stuck with me. After a year of hustling to save enough money, I finally enrolled in a state school and began studying business. My first year was a blur of textbooks, lectures, and late-night study sessions. I wasn't the best student, but I was determined. I knew I had to do well in school, but I also knew that the real value of my education wasn't just in the textbooks. It was in the people I met and the ideas I could learn from outside of class. During my second year of college, I took a part-time job at a local startup. It was a small company, but the owner had a lot of ambition, and I learned more in that job than I ever did in class. I watched him run his business, and I was amazed by his ability to adapt and make decisions quickly. Even though he wasn't a formal businessman, he had a drive that I respected. I worked for him for 2 years, learning everything I could. But something inside me still wasn't satisfied. I had this burning desire to do my own thing, to build my own company. One day, as I was sitting in class, listening to a lecture about marketing, it hit me. I could do this. I could start a business of my own. It didn't matter that I didn't have a lot of money or connections. If I could just come up with a good idea, I could make it happen. The problem was, I didn't have a great idea. I spent weeks brainstorming, trying to come up with something that would be both unique and profitable. Then, one day, while walking to class, I saw a guy selling handmade bracelets on the sidewalk. He was making decent money, and I thought to myself, I could do that. But better. I realized that the market for handmade goods was booming, and there was a way to improve on the product. I started sketching designs for unique, customizable bracelets. I sourced materials from local craft stores and even taught myself how to make them. I put together a small website and began selling them online. My first sale was exhilarating. It was a small win, but it gave me the confidence to keep going. I invested more time in learning about digital marketing, social media, and e-commerce. Slowly but surely, the orders started coming in. But it wasn't easy. In the beginning, I struggled to get traffic to my website. I didn't have the funds for big advertising campaigns, and I didn't know much about search engine optimization, SEO, or paid ads. So, I did what I knew best. I hustled. I started reaching out to influencers and bloggers who might be interested in featuring my bracelets. I offered them free products in exchange for exposure. Some said yes, others didn't, but eventually, I started building a small but loyal customer base. The turning point came when I reached out to a popular fashion blogger who agreed to feature my products in a post. Her followers loved the idea, and I saw a huge spike in sales. I used that momentum to reinvest in the business, upgrading my website, expanding my product line, and building a social media presence. I also started running targeted Facebook ads and Instagram campaigns, which helped further increase my reach. In just 2 years, my little bracelet business had grown into a full-fledged online store. I hired a few people to help with production and customer service, and I even started working on a clothing line. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of sleepless nights. There were moments when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I was really cut out for this. But I kept pushing through, focusing on learning from my mistakes and always trying to improve. Now, 5 years after I first started, my business is thriving. I've expanded into new markets, hired a team of talented individuals, and even secured investment to help grow even further. I'm no longer sitting in the back of the classroom dreaming about business. I'm living it. I still remember those early days when I couldn't afford college, when I didn't know how I would ever make it as an entrepreneur. But today, I'm proud of how far I've come. Looking back, I realized that the key to my success wasn't having a brilliant idea from the start. It was the willingness to take risks, to fail, and to keep going. Entrepreneurship is not about being perfect. It's about resilience and adaptability. Every challenge, every setback, has taught me something new. I'm not the next Zuckerberg or Musk, and I don't need to be. I'm just a guy who decided to bet on himself and build something meaningful. And for that, I am truly grateful. I've always considered myself a late bloomer, though I didn't realize how much of a late bloomer I was until one particular moment in my life. This is the story of how I started my first business at 34 years old with absolutely no experience and barely any savings to my name. It's a tale full of challenges, tough lessons, and unexpected wins that eventually led me to a point where I can look back and say, I did it my way. Let's rewind a bit to 2012. I had just left a decently stable job in finance. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it either. It felt like a cage with a pretty good view, comfortable, but confining. I was surrounded by people who had been in the industry for decades, who could talk numbers in their sleep, and yet, all I could think about was whether there was something else I could do with my life. For years, I had been pondering this, watching the world around me shift as new trends emerged. The idea of working for someone else, of sticking to a predictable schedule, seemed increasingly foreign to me. One morning, as I sipped my coffee, it hit me. I wanted to start a business. I had always been curious about tech, startups, and digital businesses. But I didn't have a tech background. I wasn't a coder or a designer. I didn't have a burning passion for some specific product. What I did have, however, was a burning desire to create something on my own. I wanted to prove that even someone without a fancy degree or a vast network could build a business from the ground up. But where do you even begin with something like that? After I left my job, I spent months reading articles, listening to podcasts, and obsessively researching how to start a business. I felt like I was drowning in information but didn't know where to focus my energy. At one point, I read about a guy who started a company selling socks online. Socks. If he could do it, why couldn't I? But after a bit of thought, I realized that socks weren't the answer for me. I wanted to build something that could scale, something with potential for growth. The first idea I had was to create an app. At the time, apps were a huge trend, and everyone seemed to be talking about the next big mobile breakthrough. I didn't know anything about app development, but I figured I could hire a developer. I searched online, contacted some freelance developers, and began piecing together a plan. It wasn't long before I realized I didn't have nearly enough money to hire the talent I needed, nor did I understand the complexities of building an app. So, I scrapped that idea. A few more months of soul-searching passed, and I came up with the idea of a subscription box service. It wasn't groundbreaking, but I liked the simplicity of it. I could curate a box of unique, interesting products each month, and people would subscribe to receive them. The idea felt right. It wasn't the next Uber or Airbnb, but it was a concept that made sense. I was still a novice, so I started by researching everything there was to know about subscription box businesses. I learned how to find suppliers, how to negotiate prices, how to market a product, and how to build a website. I didn't have any experience in these areas, but I had the drive to learn. I spent months sourcing products, creating a website using a basic template, and figuring out the logistics of shipping. I had no prior knowledge of e-commerce, but I figured it out step by step. In the early stages, I had a small group of friends and family who were supportive, but that wasn't enough to fuel the business. I needed customers. And this is where the real struggle began. I launched my subscription box service with 0 customers. My website was live, my products were ready, and I had posted a few things on social media, but the first few weeks were incredibly tough. No one was signing up. I didn't have the money to spend on ads, and honestly, I didn't know how to reach my audience. My first sales were from people I knew, some close friends, some family members. I could barely even pay for the cost of shipping the boxes, let alone make a profit. There were moments when I thought about quitting, but I kept pushing through. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was onto something. Then one night, I got an email from an influencer I had reached out to months before. She had a decent following on Instagram, and I had sent her a box with no expectations. She wanted to feature my box in one of her posts. She loved the products, and suddenly, I had a small surge of orders. It wasn't a flood, but it was a start. I realized that influencer marketing was my golden ticket, and from then on, I put more energy into networking with influencers in my niche. The next few months were a whirlwind. The more influencers shared my box, the more my orders grew. I reinvested every penny I earned into improving the business, whether it was creating better packaging, improving my website, or partnering with more influencers. Slowly but surely, my business gained traction. I had to pivot a few times along the way, adjusting my pricing model, experimenting with new products, and figuring out how to streamline my operations. It wasn't until my second year that I truly felt like I was getting the hang of things. By this point, I had a small team that helped with customer service, fulfillment, and marketing. We weren't making millions, but we were profitable, and I could finally pay myself a decent salary. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like I had made every mistake in the book, but there were also moments of pure triumph. I remember the first time I hired someone full-time, an actual employee. That felt like a huge milestone. By the third year, I had reached a point where I was able to expand the business significantly. We went from a handful of subscribers to thousands. We scaled our operations, introduced new product lines, and started working with larger brands. Eventually, I sold the business for a substantial profit, though I don't think I'll ever truly let go of what I built. The journey wasn't linear, but it was worth every challenge. Now, looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. I started with nothing but an idea and a burning desire to create something meaningful. I didn't have a background in tech or business, but I had determination, a willingness to learn, and the ability to adapt. I also had a lot of support from my friends, family, and customers. They were the ones who kept me going when things were at their hardest. If you're reading this and you're feeling uncertain about your own journey, know that you're not alone. It's okay to start late. It's okay to not have everything figured out from the beginning. It's okay to make mistakes. As long as you stay committed and continue to push forward, you'll eventually find your way. And when you do, it will be worth all the late nights, all the uncertainty, and all the fear. Trust me on that. I was 24 when I decided to start my own business. It wasn't because I had a killer idea or a burning passion to change the world. Honestly, it was more out of frustration than anything else. I had been working in a marketing job for 2 years right out of college, and I hated every single minute of it. The office politics, the long hours with no real recognition, and the constant feeling that I was just another cog in the machine, it was eating me alive. But what really pushed me over the edge was the realization that I was spending the best years of my life helping someone else build their dreams while my own sat collecting dust. So, I quit. I didn't have a concrete plan, just a vague sense of, I'll figure it out, and that was enough to make the leap. I packed up my things, told my boss I was leaving, and walked out of the office that day with a mix of fear and excitement in my chest. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I couldn't keep living like I was. The first few months were an absolute blur of confusion, panic, and sleepless nights. I had no idea what I was doing, but I threw myself into the world of entrepreneurship like I had nothing to lose, because, in reality, I didn't. I was living in a cheap apartment, scraping by on a few $1,000s in savings, with just the basic skills I had learned in my marketing job. At first, I tried my hand at a few side hustle ideas, affiliate marketing, dropshipping, selling digital products, but nothing really stuck. The affiliate marketing space was oversaturated, and the dropshipping business model just felt like I was trying to sell the same junk that everyone else was. My digital products were only bought by a handful of people, mostly friends and family. It wasn't enough to pay rent, let alone build a real business. I spent a lot of time in online forums, reading about how other entrepreneurs were getting their start. I became obsessed with finding the magic formula to success. But I quickly realized that every entrepreneur's journey was different. The more I read, the more I understood that there was no shortcut. The only thing that really mattered was commitment and persistence. One day, I stumbled across a post about a new app that could help small businesses manage their social media accounts. It wasn't the most innovative thing in the world, but the market for social media management tools was booming, and I had just enough experience to know that small business owners were drowning in content creation and scheduling. So I decided to create a tool that could make their lives easier. The next step was terrifying. I knew nothing about coding or app development, but I was too far in to back out now. I spent the next several weeks learning the basics of coding through free online resources. My initial attempts at coding were nothing short of disastrous. I couldn't even get a simple button to function properly. But every time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself that this was my shot. This was my chance to build something that could potentially change everything. After several months of trial and error, I was able to launch the first version of the app, nothing fancy, just a simple interface with a few key features. I launched it to a small group of users who had expressed interest in helping me beta test it, and to my surprise, people started using it. Some of them even sent me feedback on how I could improve it, and that was the moment I realized I was onto something. I had created something that people actually wanted, and that was a huge breakthrough for me. But the road didn't get any easier. Building a business was like running a marathon while juggling flaming swords. There were always obstacles, funding was tight, the app had bugs, and I spent far too many hours working without seeing any immediate results. My savings were quickly dwindling, and there were moments where I thought I might have to throw in the towel. But I refused to quit. I didn't have a plan B, and I couldn't afford to fail. Eventually, after what felt like years of struggle, I managed to land my first paying customer. It wasn't much. Just a small local business that had heard about my app through word of mouth. But it was enough. The validation I needed came from the simple fact that someone was willing to pay for something I had created. That was a turning point. I reinvested every penny I made into improving the app, adding more features, and scaling it to reach more customers. I started reaching out to influencers in the small business space and offering them free trials in exchange for reviews. Slowly but surely, word of my app began to spread. A year into this venture, I was still struggling to make ends meet. I was living off ramen noodles and caffeine, working long hours, and still not making much money. But I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. My user base was growing steadily, and people were starting to talk about my app on social media. It felt like things were finally coming together. Then, a miracle happened. A venture capital firm reached out to me. They had heard about my app, saw its potential, and wanted to offer me funding to help scale it further. The catch? They wanted a significant equity stake in my business, which I wasn't too thrilled about. But after discussing with a mentor, I realized that the funding would allow me to expand much faster than I could on my own. I agreed to their terms, and that decision changed everything. With the new funding, I was able to hire a small team of developers, marketers, and customer service reps. The app's features were improved, customer support became more responsive, and I finally had the resources to focus on growing the business instead of just keeping it alive. Over the next 2 years, the app grew exponentially. We expanded into new markets, added more features, and started charging higher prices for premium plans. The business was profitable, and I was finally able to take a paycheck, something I hadn't done in nearly 3 years. But the true turning point came when one of the major players in the industry, an established social media management company, acquired my startup. They had been keeping an eye on us for months and made an offer I couldn't refuse. It wasn't a life-changing sum of money, but it was enough for me to take a step back and reflect on everything I had built. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. Starting that business was one of the hardest, most stressful things I've ever done, but it also turned out to be the most rewarding. I learned that persistence, resilience, and a willingness to keep going, even when things seem impossible, can truly change your life. Now, at 29, I'm no longer the broke, desperate person I was when I first quit my job. I've had my fair share of failures and setbacks, but I've also had the privilege of building something meaningful from the ground up. I've learned that success isn't about having a perfect plan. It's about learning from mistakes, adapting, and never giving up. If you're thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Start now, even if you don't feel ready. You'll never be fully prepared, and that's okay. The journey will be messy, difficult, and full of surprises. But if you're willing to put in the work, it can also be the most rewarding experience of your life. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I grew up in a small town, and from the very beginning, I knew I wasn't going to fit the mold. My parents were both teachers, and while they were supportive of me, they had a very conventional view of success. Get a degree, get a good job, climb the corporate ladder. That's how life worked, they believed. But from an early age, I had this itch that just wouldn't go away. The desire to create something, to build something from the ground up. It wasn't until much later in life that I understood that what I was feeling was entrepreneurial drive. I didn't always have the tools to make my vision a reality. I didn't come from money, and no one in my family had ever run a business. But I had the hunger. So I went to college, not because I necessarily wanted to, but because I thought it was the right thing to do. I majored in business, mostly because it seemed like the most logical option for someone who was going to go out and start a company someday. But if I'm being honest, I was disconnected from the whole experience. Classes felt theoretical, and I was already thinking of ideas for products, services, or anything that could potentially make money. In my sophomore year, I came up with an idea for an online platform that helped small businesses streamline their operations. It was essentially an easy-to-use software that allowed owners to track inventory, sales, and customer information all in one place. I pitched it to some of my professors, but they all laughed it off as too ambitious. Focus on your grades. Focus on getting a job after graduation, they said. So, I did what anyone with an entrepreneurial mindset would do. I started working on it in my spare time. I didn't have any coding skills, but I had a friend from high school who was a self-taught developer. I reached out to him, and he agreed to help me build the prototype in exchange for a small equity share when we launched. We spent months building and tweaking the product, testing it on a handful of local businesses that were willing to give it a shot. By the time I graduated, we had a working beta. I remember my parents' concern when I told them I wasn't going to take a traditional job after graduation. They were devastated. "You've worked so hard," my mom said. "You're throwing it all away for some pipe dream." But the truth was, I wasn't throwing anything away. I was finally giving my dream a chance. I took a risk and decided to go full-time into developing this software. That's when the struggle began. Building the business wasn't glamorous, and there were countless nights I thought about quitting. I had no capital, no investors, and no idea how to actually market this product to businesses. Every small win felt like a mountain to climb, and every rejection from a potential client felt like a huge setback. But with each failure, I learned something new. I didn't know much about sales or marketing at first, but I read books, watched webinars, and reached out to other entrepreneurs for advice. Slowly, I started figuring it out. One of the hardest parts was convincing businesses to trust a fresh-out-of-college entrepreneur over established software companies with much larger teams. I couldn't compete on features or scale, so I decided to compete on service. I offered personalized onboarding, went above and beyond with customer support, and made sure that every single business that tried our software felt special. It was exhausting, but it worked. About a year after I launched, we finally started seeing traction. A small chain of coffee shops signed up, then a few local restaurants, and gradually, more and more businesses joined. The product still wasn't perfect, and we had a lot of bugs to fix, but the feedback we were getting was overwhelmingly positive. By the second year, I was able to hire a small team of developers to help scale the software and add features that businesses were asking for. But the real turning point came when a major investor took notice. He reached out to me one day after seeing our product being used by a chain of local gyms. He liked what we were doing, but he wanted to know if we were ready to grow fast. He said, "I'm not interested in small businesses. I'm interested in big businesses. I want to help you scale." It was the opportunity one had been waiting for, but it came with a price. He wanted a significant amount of control in exchange for the capital he was offering. At first, I was hesitant. Giving up control wasn't something I had considered, but at the same time, the idea of having the resources to grow rapidly was tempting. After weeks of back-and-forth negotiations, I agreed to the deal. The investment allowed us to build a larger team, expand our marketing efforts, and add features that would make our platform even more attractive to bigger clients. It also gave me the financial cushion I needed to stop worrying about day-to-day cash flow and focus more on long-term growth. With this new funding, things took off. We landed our first major client, a nationwide retail chain that needed our software to manage their thousands of locations. That deal was the validation we needed. Our user base grew exponentially, and I was finally able to take a step back from the day-to-day operations and focus on strategy. Over the next few years, we expanded internationally and began to dominate our niche in the software market. Today, the company is worth over $100 million. We've raised additional rounds of funding, acquired smaller competitors, and expanded our product offerings. But the journey has not been without its challenges. There have been times when I thought about walking away, when I felt like I couldn't handle the stress, or when I wondered if the sacrifices were worth it. But looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. I've learned that entrepreneurship is about resilience, learning, and being willing to adapt. It's about starting with an idea, having the drive to follow through, and not letting rejection or failure stop you. If I had listened to the naysayers, if I had taken the safe route, I would have never known what it felt like to build something that changes people's lives. It wasn't a smooth road, but I'm proud of how far we've come. And more importantly, I'm proud that I stuck with my dream when everyone told me it was a long shot. Let me take you back to a time when I was just an average guy working a 9-to-5 job, barely making enough to cover rent and groceries, with dreams bigger than my bank account. I've always had that entrepreneurial itch, but I never thought I could really make anything of it. My name is Kyle, and my story is about how I went from that typical office drone to building a six-figure business that I'm proud of today. It all started about 5 years ago. I was in my mid-20s, working as a junior marketing associate at a small tech company. The pay was decent, and I had a group of people I enjoyed working with, but something about the grind just didn't sit right with me. I wanted more freedom, more impact, more everything. But like most people, I was stuck in that secure job mentality, too afraid to take the leap into something unknown. That's when I came across a post online that changed everything. It was a random article about starting a dropshipping business. You've probably heard of it before, selling products from suppliers without ever having to keep stock. The idea seemed simple enough, and for someone like me who didn't have a massive capital to get started, it seemed like a good way to test the waters of entrepreneurship. I dove headfirst into research mode. I spent the next couple of weeks reading every blog, watching every YouTube tutorial, and downloading every free ebook I could find about dropshipping. It seemed too good to be true, but I figured I had nothing to lose. My credit card was maxed out, and my savings were practically non-existent, but the idea of running my own business was too tempting to ignore. So, I bought my first course. It wasn't cheap, about $500, which was a lot of money for me back then. The course promised to teach me everything from setting up an online store to mastering Facebook ads. I started spending all my free time after work learning about e-commerce, product research, and digital marketing. It was overwhelming at first. There were so many things to learn: how to choose products, how to create a website, how to manage customer service. But I pushed through. For the next couple of months, I worked on setting up my store. I found a niche that I thought was cool: eco-friendly products. I figured that with the rise of environmental awareness, people would be into sustainable goods. I launched my store, slapped some catchy ads on Facebook, and waited, and waited, and waited some more. But nothing happened. No sales. Zero. Zilch. At first, I didn't know what I was doing wrong. I had done all the right things, according to the course. I had a decent website, my ads looked professional, and I had chosen products that were in demand. But it wasn't working. I felt like I had wasted all that time and money, and I was getting pretty discouraged. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. I took a step back and reevaluated. I realized that my marketing skills were subpar. I didn't know how to create engaging ads or target the right people. So, I doubled down on learning about Facebook ads. I took a few additional courses, watched more tutorials, and joined some Facebook groups where entrepreneurs shared their experiences. Slowly, things started to click. I reworked my ads. I changed my approach to target a specific audience, people who were passionate about sustainability and eco-conscious living. I created more compelling copy and used better images. And slowly, it paid off. My first sale came through after about 3 months of struggle. I still remember the excitement of seeing that email notification pop up. It wasn't much, $$25 order for a bamboo toothbrush, but it felt like a huge win. From that point, I didn't stop. I continued to optimize my ads, tweak my website, and test new products. Over the next 6 months, sales started to trickle in more consistently. I was still working my full-time job, but now I was making a few $100s a month from my online store. It wasn't much, but it was something, and it felt like progress. Then, one day, things changed. I had just returned from a family vacation when I checked my phone. I had missed a few calls from my supplier. They left me a voicemail that made my heart skip a beat. "We've run out of stock on all your best-selling products, and there's a delay in restocking." My heart sank. These were my top sellers, the ones driving the most revenue. Without them, my store would essentially be dead in the water. I immediately went to work, trying to find alternative suppliers. But the clock was ticking, and the stress was building. After some frantic searching, I found a new supplier with a similar product line. They had the items I needed in stock, but the price was slightly higher. Still, I had no choice. I placed a large order, praying that I wasn't throwing my money away. I relaunched my ads, adjusted my pricing, and hoped for the best. Fortunately, it worked. Sales picked back up, and I even started seeing some profits. By this point, my store was generating enough income that I felt comfortable quitting my full-time job. It was a terrifying decision, leaving behind a stable paycheck for the uncertainty of running my own business, but it was one of the best decisions I ever made. In the next year, my business grew exponentially. I expanded into other niches, started selling on additional platforms like Amazon and Etsy, and even hired my first virtual assistant to help with customer service. The revenue started hitting numbers I hadn't thought possible when I first started. I was no longer just scraping by, I was thriving. Today, my business generates over $200,000 a year in revenue. It's still not perfect. There are plenty of challenges, from supply chain issues to marketing changes, but I've built something I'm proud of. I've learned so much along the way, not just about business, but about myself. I learned that I could take risks, face setbacks, and still keep moving forward. To anyone reading this who's in a similar position to where I was 5 years ago, don't give up. It's hard, it's frustrating, and there will be days when you feel like you're not cut out for it. But every step, no matter how small, takes you closer to your goal. Keep pushing, keep learning, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Success isn't about avoiding failure. It's about learning from it and moving forward anyway. If I can go from a broke office worker to running a 6-figure business, so can you. Believe in yourself and start today. I was 26 when I decided to leave my stable job and go all in on a startup idea. A risky move for anyone, but I was tired of the 9 to 5 grind and wanted more. At that age, I thought I had figured it all out. I had a decent savings account, a couple of mentors who believed in me, and a business idea that I thought could change everything. Little did I know, I was about to learn some hard lessons that would shape me into who I am today. It all started when I stumbled across a problem that I thought could be solved with a simple app. I'd been working in digital marketing for a few years and had been exposed to many small business owners, most of whom struggled with the same issue. They didn't have an easy way to manage their social media presence. This wasn't just about scheduling posts. It was about streamlining all aspects of social media engagement, tracking metrics, automating responses, and analyzing trends in real time. I thought, if I can create a platform that helps them do this, it'll be huge. I spent months researching, talking to potential customers, and building a prototype. My plan was simple. I would design a platform that would simplify social media management for small businesses. I envisioned it as a tool that would automate tasks like posting and responding to customers, while also giving business owners the insights they needed to grow their social media presence. When I finally had the product ready, I felt a mix of excitement and fear. I knew I wasn't the first person to come up with a social media management tool. There were already giants like Hootsuite and Buffer, but I believed my product would be different. I had spent hours interviewing small business owners, and they all mentioned the same pain point. The existing tools were too complicated for someone with no technical background. My solution was simpler, more user-friendly, and offered a lot of the features they needed without being overwhelming. The first couple of months were a whirlwind. I poured everything I had into marketing, Facebook ads, Instagram influencers, blog posts. I was even reaching out to small businesses in person, offering them a free trial in exchange for feedback. Things didn't move as quickly as I'd hoped, but I kept pushing. I could feel the momentum building, but there were constant setbacks. Servers crashed. Bugs appeared. Customers weren't as enthusiastic as I thought they'd be. The product was good, but not great, and I didn't realize how much work was left to do until it was too late. At that point, the pressure began to mount. My savings started dwindling, and I found myself juggling multiple part-time jobs just to keep the company afloat. I had a team of 3 by then, 2 developers and a marketing specialist, but I was running on fumes. One night, I stayed up all night working on a major update to the app. I had to get it right. The next morning, I sat down to check on the app's performance, only to find that the update had broken some key functionality. A huge mistake, and a costly one. Customers started complaining, and I lost a few big accounts. My stomach was in knots as I realized the scale of the issue. I spent the next few weeks fixing bugs and trying to regain customer trust. But the reality was, I was out of my depth. I didn't have the technical knowledge to anticipate every problem, and my small team was stretched thin. I tried to convince myself that I could keep going, but deep down, I knew something had to change. The turning point came during a conversation with one of my mentors. He was the kind of guy who'd built several successful companies, and his advice had always been spot on. We met for coffee one afternoon, and after a few minutes of casual talk, he asked me the question I had been avoiding. Is this the right path for you? At first, I didn't want to admit it, but I had to be honest. The stress was eating me alive. The fear of failure was consuming my every waking moment. I had become so wrapped up in trying to prove something to myself that I was losing sight of what mattered. It wasn't just about the product. It was about how I was running the business and, more importantly, how I was taking care of myself. I took a step back, reevaluated my approach, and realized that I needed to pivot. I couldn't keep trying to outdo the bigger companies by building a product with the same feature set. I needed to find a unique angle. I looked into the feedback I'd been receiving, and a common theme stood out. People weren't just looking for another scheduling tool. They wanted a way to make their social media more engaging. They wanted to connect with their audience on a deeper level. That's when it hit me. What if the platform wasn't just about automating posts, but about helping businesses create authentic, personalized connections with their customers? It was a huge shift, but I believed it could work. We spent the next 6 months completely overhauling the app. We redefined its purpose and features. Instead of just scheduling posts, it now allowed businesses to engage with their followers in real time, giving them insights on what content resonated the most, and providing tools for creating custom, interactive posts. We also added a chatbot feature to answer customer queries and a new dashboard that made it easy to track engagement. It wasn't just a tool for managing content. It was a way for businesses to build a real relationship with their audience. This new direction made all the difference. It was exactly what people needed, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Customers started flocking back, and the number of new sign-ups skyrocketed. We doubled our user base in just a few months. I began hiring more people, more developers, more customer support reps, and for the first time, I felt like the business was truly growing. But success didn't come overnight. There were still tough days, like when a competitor launched a similar feature and tried to steal our market share. We had to quickly adapt and innovate again, but each challenge taught us valuable lessons. Over time, the platform evolved, and so did I. I became a better leader, a better entrepreneur, and a better person. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. That initial product failed, but it wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a much bigger journey. Entrepreneurship isn't just about creating something new. It's about learning from failure, adapting, and growing through the tough times. And for me, that's what makes the whole ride worth it. I don't know what the future holds, but one thing's for sure, I'll never stop learning. I never set out to be an entrepreneur. To be honest, I didn't even know what that word really meant when I first started. But life, as it often does, has a way of pushing you down paths you never intended to walk. And if there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that the journey can be more unpredictable than you ever imagined, but it's always worth taking. My story began in my mid-20s. At the time, I was working at a small tech company that offered software solutions for businesses. I wasn't a developer, just a regular customer support guy answering calls, dealing with clients, and sometimes venting about how annoying the job could be. The pay was decent, but it wasn't going anywhere. I had zero intention of making a career out of it. I was just coasting. Then, one day, my manager came to me with some news. The company was going under. They'd been struggling financially for a while, and despite their best efforts to secure more clients, the market had shifted and the competition was growing stronger. There were layoffs, and I was one of the last to go. No severance, no goodbye party, just an email telling me to pack up and leave. In hindsight, I should have been devastated, but honestly, I wasn't. I was relieved. This was the sign I needed to stop playing it safe and start taking control of my own future. It's funny how sometimes things have to fall apart for you to realize you were never meant to be in that place in the first place. But then came the reality check. I didn't have a solid plan. I didn't have the kind of savings that would allow me to just take a break or launch a startup. I had a few months of rent saved up, but I wasn't naive enough to think that would last long. So, like any person with no clear direction, I did what everyone else does. I Googled stuff. I researched a lot, business ideas, side hustles, what it takes to start a company, the basics of marketing, you name it. It all seemed overwhelming, but there was one thing that stood out to me. I didn't want to create just any business. I wanted to create something that I genuinely cared about. That was the first real lesson I learned. Businesses aren't just about making money. They're about solving a problem, and if you care about the problem you're solving, the rest will follow. After weeks of brainstorming, I stumbled upon something that felt right. At the time, the trend of personalized products was growing, and people were starting to care more about bespoke items, whether it was custom t-shirts, personalized gifts, or one-of-a-kind furniture. I thought, why not create a platform where people could order personalized tech accessories? Cases, skins, laptop covers, all tailored to their style. The idea wasn't revolutionary, but it felt fresh enough to give me an edge in a growing niche. Now, the real challenge began. I didn't have the skills to design tech products, let alone create an entire e-commerce website. But what I had going for me was a willingness to learn and an absurd amount of time on my hands. I watched tutorials. I picked up some basic web design. I learned how to use Shopify and other tools that were necessary to make my dream a reality. Slowly but surely, I pieced together the building blocks of my business. But even with all the time spent learning, I still had one massive obstacle: money. Starting an e-commerce business requires upfront capital, even if you're doing everything yourself. I had about $2,000 in savings at the time, which wasn't nearly enough to buy inventory, set up a website, or pay for ads. So, I did what I had to do. I took out a small loan from a bank. It was a risky move, but I couldn't see any other way forward. With the money, I purchased a small inventory of products, set up my Shopify store, and started designing. But after a month of pushing out ads and promoting the site, I realized that I was getting views, but no sales. I had made one critical mistake. I didn't truly understand my target audience. I had assumed that the whole personalized tech accessory thing would be enough, but I hadn't nailed down the specific needs of my customers. I didn't know what they wanted beyond just a cool design. And that was a problem. I took a step back. I started doing more research into customer behavior, what made people buy, and why they would want a personalized item. I began refining my designs and marketing to emphasize the emotional connection people have with tech products. They didn't just want a cool laptop case. They wanted something that expressed their personality. That was the key. I reworked my entire approach, this time focusing on highly customizable designs that allowed customers to input their own ideas. I added a feature where customers could submit photos, create designs, or even customize colors and patterns. Slowly, people started buying. It wasn't overnight success, but it was progress. But the road was far from smooth. There were issues with suppliers, late shipments, and customers who wanted their money back after receiving their products. There were plenty of sleepless nights spent trying to find solutions to the endless stream of problems. I also had to learn how to manage customer service on my own, which was a huge learning curve. The pressure was mounting, and at one point, I seriously considered quitting. I remember one late night, sitting in front of my computer with barely enough money to cover the next month's expenses, thinking about just going back to a regular job. The stability of a paycheck was tempting, but something in me pushed through. I kept going. I improved my processes, listened to feedback, and kept finding ways to optimize my business. And then, one day, it happened. My business started gaining traction. The combination of custom designs, the focus on personalization, and the high level of customer service finally paid off. Slowly, the orders started increasing. Fast forward to today, and my small side hustle has turned into a full-fledged business with multiple employees and a solid customer base. I've learned so much along the way: how to manage a business, how to navigate the ups and downs, and most importantly, how to trust myself even when it seems like everything is falling apart. It hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. Looking back, I often wonder what would have happened if I hadn't lost my job that day. Would I have ever taken that leap into entrepreneurship? Would I have ever pushed myself to learn, fail, and grow? The truth is, I'll never know. But what I do know is this: life doesn't always go as planned, but if you're willing to embrace the unknown, it can lead you to places you never imagined. Now, every time I look at the business I've built, I'm reminded of one thing: the best opportunities don't come from playing it safe. They come from stepping into the unknown and taking risks. If you're stuck, if you're unsure, if you feel like everything is falling apart, take a step back, reassess, and keep pushing forward. The path might not be clear, but with enough grit and determination, you'll get where you need to go. I did. I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit, but I never really knew how to tap into it. I came from a family of traditional workers. My dad was a factory supervisor, and my mom worked as a nurse. Growing up, the idea of owning a business or taking big risks was foreign to me. We were taught to work hard, get a job, and stay steady. However, as I entered adulthood, I began to feel this restless itch to create something of my own. It all started when I was 26. I had just quit a job I hated, working as an assistant manager at a retail store. The pay wasn't bad, but the environment was toxic. My boss was a micromanager, and the work felt like I was spinning my wheels with no real growth. I had a decent savings cushion, and after weeks of feeling miserable, I decided to leave. I didn't have a clear idea of what I wanted to do, but I knew I couldn't stay there anymore. For a while, I drifted from one idea to another. I considered opening a coffee shop, a small clothing line, even a mobile car wash business. But nothing clicked. I wasn't passionate about any of those things, and I felt like I'd be wasting my time and money. Then one day, I was at home browsing through the internet when I came across a thread about reselling limited edition sneakers. I'd always had a mild interest in sneakers, but I never realized how big the reselling market was. People were making thousands of dollars off shoes that only released in limited quantities. Something about the idea sparked my interest. I'd never resold anything before, but I was always on the lookout for ways to make money. I started researching sneaker reselling, reading forums, watching YouTube videos, and joining online communities. The more I learned, the more excited I became. There was a whole ecosystem I had no idea existed. Bought services to increase your chances of winning limited sneaker drops, sneaker conventions, online marketplaces, the list went on. The margins were crazy. People were flipping shoes for double, sometimes triple their original value. It was like the Wild West of e-commerce. I started small. I didn't have a lot of money to invest, so I figured I'd start with 1 or 2 pairs of shoes. I spent weeks learning about sneaker releases, the best websites to buy from, and how to use bots effectively. At first, I didn't hit any wins. The bots I used were buggy, and the limited editions I was targeting sold out in seconds. I felt like I was wasting money on software that didn't work, but I didn't give up. I kept refining my approach, learning from my failures. Then, one day, it happened. I was able to successfully buy a pair of highly sought-after Air Jordans. I spent $180 on the shoes, and within 24 hours, I had a buyer willing to pay $400. The thrill of flipping that first pair was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. It was like I had unlocked a new skill. The money wasn't huge, but the process felt addictive. I had to do it again. I started reinvesting every penny I made into more inventory. I was getting better at picking out which sneakers were going to sell well, and I was learning to navigate the chaos of sneaker releases. I even started building relationships with other resellers, learning tricks of the trade. I started following trends, predicting which shoes would gain value over time. This wasn't just about buying and flipping. It was about becoming a part of a community, and slowly, I began to build my own brand in that space. I won't lie, there were some low points. There were months where I couldn't get a single pair of sneakers. It felt like every release I targeted was either sold out or went to bots before I even had a chance. I was frustrated, but I refused to quit. I kept tweaking my strategy, trying different bots, optimizing my time, and even learning about sneaker authentication to ensure I wasn't buying fakes. The market was incredibly competitive, and I had to stay ahead of the curve. By year 2, I was seeing some serious profits. I expanded my reach and started working with a small team of other resellers who helped with sourcing and listing the sneakers. I also started using Instagram and TikTok to show off my sneaker collection, which helped attract new customers. I'd share unboxing videos, give sneaker advice, and show behind the scenes of how I source my shoes. It wasn't just about selling. It was about creating content and building an audience. But as my business grew, so did the challenges. I had to keep up with the rising cost of bots, deal with shipping issues, and navigate the ever-changing landscape of sneaker drops. Then, there was the issue of burnout. I was working around the clock, flipping shoes during the day, and dealing with orders at night. I was losing sleep, and it was taking a toll on my mental health. I knew I needed to make changes if I wanted to scale sustainably. I took a step back, reevaluated my processes, and began outsourcing more of the work. I hired a team to help with customer service and started using more advanced bots that could handle releases while I focused on the bigger picture. I even brought on a content creator to manage my social media accounts so I could concentrate on strategy and scaling. Slowly but surely, I built a more streamlined operation. The real breakthrough came when I decided to invest in a physical retail space. I wanted to create a sneaker boutique that was more than just a store. It was going to be an experience. I didn't just want to sell sneakers. I wanted to give my customers a reason to visit. I hired a few more people, redesigned the shop, and filled it with rare and exclusive sneakers. The response was overwhelming. People loved the atmosphere, and the business took off in ways I didn't expect. I had gone from reselling sneakers in my spare time to owning a store that became a local hub for sneakerheads. By the time I turned 30, I was living a completely different life. I had multiple streams of income, online sales, my physical store, and partnerships with sneaker brands. I had taken risks, failed, learned, and eventually succeeded. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far I've come. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I wanted to quit, but I stuck with it. Now, at 32, I still run my sneaker business, but I've diversified into other ventures. I've invested in real estate, launched an online course for aspiring resellers, and even started a podcast where I interview other entrepreneurs in the sneaker industry. It's a far cry from the miserable retail job I left behind all those years ago, and I'm proud of what I've built. If there's one thing I've learned from this journey, it's that success doesn't happen overnight. It takes persistence, adaptability, and a willingness to fail and learn from it. You've got to be willing to put in the work when no one is watching and keep pushing when it feels like the odds are stacked against you. Entrepreneurship isn't glamorous, but when it pays off, it's worth every ounce of effort. Looking back at my journey, I realized that the best decision I ever made was to bet on myself, even when I didn't know where it would lead. So, here's a long one that I've been thinking about sharing for a while. It's not your usual, I started a business in my garage story, and it's not all sunshine and roses either. But it's real, and I think it might resonate with some of you out there. I've spent the past few years trying to make something of myself after hitting rock bottom, both in my personal life and professionally. It's been a hell of a ride, but I'm finally in a place where I can say I made it. Or at least, I'm on my way. Let's start at the beginning. A few years ago, I was living in a tiny, rundown apartment in the middle of a city that was way too expensive for someone with my salary. I had just gone through a nasty breakup and was trying to pick up the pieces of a life that had come apart at the seams. I had a decent job in marketing, but nothing to show for it except bills piling up and a stack of unopened final notice letters from creditors. At that time, I had one thing going for me, a deep-seated passion for photography. It was something I'd always loved, but never thought it could be more than just a hobby. I used my weekends to take pictures of my neighborhood, my friends, anything I could find to keep my mind off of all the mess I was dealing with. One night, as I was sitting in my apartment, Trying to figure out how I was going to pay rent for the month, I saw an ad pop up on Facebook about a photography contest. The prize was a nice chunk of change and a spotlight on a well-known platform. That was the push I needed. I had a camera, I had the skills, and what the hell did I have to lose at that point? I entered the contest, and to my shock, I won. The exposure was huge. I started getting inquiries for photo shoots, first from friends and acquaintances, and then from strangers who saw my work online. I remember the first paid gig I had. It was for a local restaurant that needed some shots for their menu. I made $200, and I felt like a millionaire. The win didn't just come with money. It came with validation. I was good at something, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had a direction. But that validation also came with pressure. I wanted more. I wanted to build a business, not just do the occasional gig. But how do you turn a hobby into something sustainable when you're barely making ends meet? For the first few months, I worked my day job while also doing photo shoots on the weekends. I had zero business sense back then. I didn't know how to price my services, what equipment to invest in, or how to market myself. I remember asking a fellow photographer for advice, and they just told me, make sure you're charging enough to cover your costs and pay yourself. That sounded simple enough, but I had no idea what my costs were or how much I should charge. So I undercharged like crazy. I was desperate to build a client base and get my name out there. So I took every job that came my way, even if it meant working for less than minimum wage when you factored in my time and equipment costs. There were times when I thought I was doing it all wrong. I was working 50 to 60 hours a week, splitting my time between my full-time job and photography. My friends kept telling me to quit my day job and go full-time with the photography business. But it was hard to take that leap when you're not sure if you'll be able to make rent next month. Then came the turning point. One of my clients, a local fashion designer, referred me to a larger brand that needed product photography for an upcoming ad campaign. I didn't know it at the time, but this would be the job that changed everything. The shoot itself was a whirlwind. I worked long hours, often late into the night, but the result was a stunning collection of images that the brand loved. A few weeks later, I got an email asking if I'd be willing to fly out to shoot their new collection for their next season's ad campaign. They were offering me more money than I had ever seen in my life. That shoot opened doors I didn't even know existed. Suddenly, I was getting calls from other big brands, designers, and agencies asking me to come on board for shoots. But with that success came another challenge: how to scale my business without burning out. I made a lot of mistakes. For one, I didn't build a team early enough. I tried to do everything myself: marketing, photography, editing, accounting, the works. It wasn't sustainable, and I quickly realized I needed help. So, I hired a part-time assistant, someone who could handle the administrative side of things while I focused on the creative work. That decision changed everything. But hiring wasn't the only thing that shifted. I also learned to say no. For the longest time, I was saying yes to everything. Low-paying jobs, last-minute requests, things that didn't align with my long-term goals. Saying no was hard at first, but I started being more selective with the clients I worked with. I focused on quality over quantity, and it paid off. Fast forward to now. I've expanded my business beyond photography into content creation, running a team of 5 full-time employees, and working with some of the biggest brands in the industry. I've been able to travel the world for shoots, and I've even launched my own photography workshops. More importantly, I'm financially stable for the first time in years, and I'm actually enjoying what I do. I don't dread Mondays anymore, and I'm grateful for the hard lessons I learned along the way. But the best part of the journey has been the personal growth. I've gone from being broke and burned out to having a thriving business and a sense of purpose. I've realized that success isn't just about money or fame. It's about creating something that you're proud of and that brings value to the world. I'm not done yet, and I'm not sure what's next, but I'm excited to keep pushing forward. So, to anyone out there who feels stuck, broke, or like they're just not getting anywhere, keep going. It's not going to be easy, and you'll make a lot of mistakes, but if you're passionate about something, there's a way forward. Just be patient, learn from your failures, and don't be afraid to ask for help. You never know when the next big opportunity will come knocking. Thanks for reading my story. It feels good to share it. I still remember the day it all started, February 18th, 2016. It was a cold, gray morning when I sat in my small apartment in Chicago, trying to avoid the pile of bills on my desk and the constant pressure of figuring out how to make rent that month. At the time, I was working a dead-end job as a marketing assistant at a mid-sized firm. I hated it. It was the kind of job where you knew your contributions didn't matter. Every day felt like I was just spinning my wheels, hoping for something, anything, to change. But nothing did. My life was stuck, and I was starting to lose hope. One afternoon, I took a break from my monotonous tasks and found myself scrolling through Reddit, like I did most days to avoid the crushing reality of my situation. I stumbled across a post about a guy who had quit his 9-to-5 job to start an online business, selling custom t-shirts. His story was similar to mine in many ways. He was fed up with his day job, took a risk, and built something from the ground up. He was now making 6 figures a year, traveling the world, and living life on his own terms. That post changed everything for me. I had always been interested in e-commerce, but it seemed so out of reach. It was for people with more experience, more money, and more connections, definitely not someone like me. But after reading that post, something clicked. If he could do it, why couldn't I? I spent the next several weeks diving headfirst into researching e-commerce. I watched YouTube videos, read articles, and took online courses, anything I could get my hands on. I had no technical experience, but I was willing to learn. My first goal was to launch an online store. I decided to sell something I loved, vintage and rare sneakers. I had always been obsessed with sneakers, and I knew there was a market for rare, hard-to-find shoes. The only problem was, I didn't have much money to invest in inventory. At that point, I was living paycheck to paycheck, so I needed to be creative. I realized I could start by flipping sneakers. Instead of buying large quantities up front, I would buy sneakers at discounted prices from online marketplaces, clean them up, and resell them for a profit. It wasn't a glamorous idea, but it was something that could get me started with minimal investment. I had about $200 saved up, which I used to buy my first pair of sneakers, an old pair of Air Jordans that were being sold below market value. I took photos of the shoes, created a simple listing on eBay, and waited. Within 24 hours, they sold for a profit of $60. I couldn't believe it. It was a small win, but it was enough to convince me that this idea could work. Over the next few months, I continued flipping sneakers, slowly building up a small but steady stream of income. I reinvested every penny into more inventory, learning along the way about pricing, marketing, and customer service. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I stayed up until 3 a.m. packing shoes and responding to customer inquiries. Some orders fell through, and I had to deal with returns and unhappy buyers. But with each setback, I learned something new. By the time the summer of 2017 rolled around, my side hustle had grown enough that I felt confident enough to quit my day job. I was still terrified, but I was finally in control of my own destiny. I knew I had a long road ahead, but at least I was heading in the right direction. That's when the real challenges began. Without a stable income, I had to hustle harder than ever. I spent hours researching marketing strategies and figuring out how to drive traffic to my website. I also learned about social media advertising, specifically Instagram and Facebook ads. I started building a brand around my sneaker business, creating posts that highlighted not only the shoes I was selling, but the culture around sneaker collecting. I began to connect with influencers in the sneaker world and negotiated deals for them to showcase my products on their accounts. It wasn't an instant success. In fact, the first few months were tough. My ads weren't converting, and I wasn't making as many sales as I had hoped. But I kept at it, tweaking my strategy, learning from my mistakes, and optimizing my campaigns. Eventually, my hard work started to pay off. My sales began to grow, and I started to gain a loyal customer base. In late 2017, I took a risk and invested in a bulk order of limited edition sneakers. It was a big gamble, but it paid off. I was able to sell out of the inventory in just a few weeks, and my revenue skyrocketed. That was the moment I knew I had made it. I had finally built something that was sustainable. But I didn't stop there. I wanted to scale. I expanded my product offerings, bringing in accessories, clothing, and even starting a YouTube channel where I shared sneaker reviews, news, and advice. I also hired a small team to help with customer service, shipping, and marketing. Slowly but surely, my business was growing. By 2019, I was making 6 figures a year, and by 2020, I was able to quit the side hustle and focus entirely on the business. It wasn't always smooth sailing. There were ups and downs, and the COVID-19 pandemic created its own set of challenges. But I learned to adapt. I pivoted my business model to meet new demands, such as offering virtual consultations for sneaker collectors and starting a subscription box service for exclusive sneakers. In 2022, I expanded my business internationally, shipping sneakers to countries around the world. What started as a small side hustle from my apartment in Chicago had now turned into a full-fledged global brand. I'd gone from scraping by to running a seven-figure business, and I couldn't believe how far I'd come. Now, in 2025, my business is stronger than ever. I've expanded into new product lines, collaborated with major brands, and built a community of passionate sneaker enthusiasts. I still remember the feeling of being stuck in that tiny apartment, but today, I get to live life on my own terms. I travel the world, attend sneaker conventions, and speak at entrepreneurial events, sharing my story and the lessons I've learned along the way. Looking back, I can't help but feel a sense of pride. The journey wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't without its sacrifices, but it was worth every sleepless night, every failed attempt, and every moment of doubt. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that perseverance pays off. You have to keep going, even when it feels like nothing is working. Keep learning, keep improving, and most importantly, never give up. And to anyone out there who feels stuck, just know that it's possible to change your life. If I can do it, so can you. I remember the first time I thought about starting my own business. It was during my final year of college. I had always been a bit of a dreamer, always doodling in notebooks with ideas of what I could do to change the world. It sounds cheesy, but it's true. I was always fascinated by the idea of entrepreneurship, but wasn't sure how to actually turn those big ideas into reality. At the time, I was studying computer science, and I had this wild idea about creating an app that would help people find local services in a way that was more intuitive than anything on the market. Think of it as a combination of Google Maps, Yelp, and Uber, but without the confusion and overload of information. The app would help you find the best services nearby: plumbers, electricians, even dog walkers, but with a much more user-friendly interface and a feedback system that prioritized quality over quantity. I thought I had it all figured out. The problem? I had zero experience in business. I didn't even know how to properly structure a business model. I had one friend, a guy named John, who was a marketing major, and we would often talk about how we could make my idea a reality. But deep down, I didn't know what I was doing. I spent months coding the prototype in between classes. It was messy, not elegant at all, but it worked. I showed it to John, and he was excited about the potential. We started brainstorming on how we could get it in front of people. We decided we needed to start small, focusing on just one neighborhood to test things out. That way, we wouldn't have to worry about scaling or spending tons of money on ads. But as time passed, my excitement slowly turned into fear. What if it didn't work? What if I failed? I kept asking myself questions like, am I really cut out for this? I didn't have a business degree, no prior experience in marketing, and I didn't know anyone who had built a successful startup. I felt like a fish out of water. And so, the idea of my app, which once seemed so straightforward, became overwhelming. John and I kept talking, and he would encourage me not to give up. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was wasting my time. After all, I wasn't even sure how to fund the project. I didn't have any savings, and I didn't want to ask my parents for money. I was barely scraping by on a college budget, living off of ramen noodles and the occasional pizza night. Then came the turning point. One evening, John and I were hanging out at our favorite coffee shop, which we frequented because they had the best Wi-Fi. We were discussing possible ways to fund our app when I overheard a conversation at the table next to us. Two guys were talking about investing in startups. One of them had mentioned that he was part of an angel investment group that helped young entrepreneurs get their businesses off the ground. My ears perked up immediately. I couldn't resist. I turned around and asked them how they got involved with startups and if they had any advice. One of the guys, an older gentleman named Steve, turned out to be an entrepreneur himself. He had founded several successful startups, sold a couple of them, and was now looking to invest in new talent. I nervously explained my idea to him, and after a brief conversation, he asked if I had a business plan. I froze. I don't, I admitted. I just have this app and some ideas, but no real plan on how to make it work. Steve didn't laugh at me. He didn't walk away. Instead, he said something that would stick with me forever. The idea is only part of the equation. You need to focus on the execution, and that starts with a solid plan. If you're serious about this, come back to me with something more concrete. But keep in mind, ideas are easy. It's the execution that separates the winners from the losers. That moment shifted something inside of me. I realized I couldn't just rely on a good idea. I needed to put in the work, the real work. Over the next few weeks, I immersed myself in everything related to startups, business models, marketing strategies, financial projections, and, of course, how to pitch to investors. I built a more refined version of my business plan, outlining exactly how the app would operate, what features it would offer, and how we would make money. Steve was true to his word. He agreed to meet again. This time, I was more prepared. I walked him through the plan, and, much to my surprise, he liked what he saw. "I'm not guaranteeing anything," he said, "but I'll introduce you to some people. Get your app in front of the right eyes, and we'll see where it goes." That was the first time I felt a real sense of validation. I was on my way. With Steve's help, I met a group of investors who were interested in the concept and willing to provide seed funding. The next few months were a blur of meetings, pitching, and refining the app. We officially launched the beta version in the neighborhood we had chosen, and it was an instant hit. People loved how easy it was to find trusted services nearby, and we received glowing feedback from our users. However, that success didn't come without its own set of challenges. As we grew, so did the competition. Larger, well-funded companies began to take notice and started developing similar apps. I remember feeling a surge of anxiety. Would we be able to compete with these giants? Would we lose everything we had worked for? But then, I had a conversation with one of our first users, a small business owner who had listed his services on our platform. He told me how our app had helped him grow his business and attract more customers than he had ever imagined. That conversation reignited my passion. We were doing something important. We were helping people, and that was the core of why we had started in the first place. It wasn't always smooth sailing after that. We had technical hiccups, and we made a few bad business decisions, but we always learned from our mistakes. Over the years, our app grew. We expanded to other neighborhoods, and then cities, and eventually we became a nationwide service. We pivoted, refined, and added new features based on user feedback. Looking back now, it's surreal to think about how far we've come. What started as a college project has now become a thriving business. There were countless moments when I wanted to give up, when I thought I wasn't good enough, or the idea wasn't strong enough. But persistence, a solid plan, and the right people in my corner made all the difference. So, if you're reading this and you're thinking about starting your own business, just know that the road isn't easy, and it won't always look how you expect it to. But if you're willing to learn, adapt, and push through the tough times, you can make it happen. Don't let fear hold you back. The world needs your ideas. And who knows? You might just end up having the same conversation with someone at a coffee shop that changes everything. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.